Well, thank you so much for joining us again. I'm particularly thrilled today to bring you somebody who I think is going to give us some unique insights about how we make this going back to work work. So it's very exciting to have Professor Ray Cooper with us this morning, who's the Professor of Gender, Work and Employment Relations at the University of Sydney Business School. Thank you so much, Professor.
Pleasure, Margy. Nice to be here.
Thank you so much. Now, we're all in this space where we're starting to think about recovery and the light at the end of the tunnel, and some people are already back in the workplace, particularly from a hospitality point of view. And we're all coming to, hopefully, what is the end of the biggest global social experiment ever. What do you think are the biggest sort of downsides that have come out of this experiment, and at the same time, the most important things that are going to be quite interesting and positive?
Great questions, big questions. Well, I think the most obvious thing, and I suppose for you and for your members, it's most acute, and that is the enormous number of people who've either lost their jobs or really substantially lost hours of work, which is really challenging for business, really challenging for employees. I think there's something like 2.7 million ABS reported last week of employees who've either lost jobs, lost a significant number of hours, or who've stopped seeking work. So that is a lot of our people who are in a really precarious situation. So I think that's number one. That is the most obvious thing and the biggest challenge that we're going to have in the short, medium and long term, actually. In terms of other issues, I think we have just gone through the largest national experiment, probably international experiment, in people working from home. And I think this is showing both some positives that can be associated with that and some challenges, but I think also, there are some issues that we've got to think about in the future about how we're going to try to manage that and what the demands are going to be from employees around flexible working, especially working from home or out of the office.
So in an industry like ours that's, largely people-based, so there's a lot of face-to-face interaction, as well as, office type corporate environment. What do you think potentially the things employers should be conscious of in those people traffic relationships, and then perhaps the things that they should be considering in terms of returning workers to an office mechanism?
Okay, good. Yeah, good questions, because I think we always assume when we're having these conversations about flexible working, we're assuming that everyone can work from home. And that's not the case for a large proportion of the workforce, a lot of your members included, but also, many of the people who are working on the front line as a part of this crisis, whether that's health and human services or in care jobs. So we need to think broadly about the types of jobs and industries that we're talking about. I would think that for, the front-facing, client-facing, physically facing client work, I think that's really the first things we've got to be thinking about is the safety of our people, and also about the safety of clients and customers. So thinking through the way that we're designing workspaces and workplaces and designing those interactions in a way that we keep everyone safe, I think should be top of mind, and I'm sure it is for many employers. But I think we've also, as we start to return, obviously that is going to mean some quite significant changes in the way that we do business on a daily, hourly, by minute basis. So that's the, real customer facing employees. But I think we also have to think in the corporate and the office environment about what flexible working might mean in those contexts. I think a lot of the large employers who have big footprint office spaces in the cities, where there's hot desking and where, there's large amounts of people circulating on these, really large floors, I think there's going to have to be a redesign and a rethink of how that's working. But I think also there's some real opportunities here. So a lot of people have started for the first time working from home where that's been possible. And a lot of those people are working from home in the context where previously some of their managers or some of their employers have said that's just not possible. So I think we've shown that it's possible, but I think we need to work out what the return looks like and how to make that sustainable for employees and also for businesses.
So given that I know that this is, part of your area of study and body of work, I mean, what do you think the kind of diversity changes are that we might see in the workforce? Because essentially, if it means now you can work from home, what does this mean for women in work? What does it mean for a wider diversity approach and distance too?
Yeah, really good questions. So our research, a lot of the focus is on gender and how interactions at work shape people's lives, essentially. One thing we do know is that women are more likely to have access to flexible working arrangements. I think what we've done is assume that flexibility and working from home makes everything easy for women. So I think at one level it does.
No!
So I think by this experiment, and I must say my own personal experience of this, is that actually having everyone at home at the same time and trying to work is really hard to do. So I think we need to work out not just a holus bolus working from home and isn't it great that everyone can be there at once. Let's not assume that that's a productive way of working. We've got to work out how to do that well. Look, another thing we know, Margy, is that men have traditionally shown a little less interest than women in working from home. And actually when men do ask their employers and their managers whether they may be able to work from home, they're much more likely than women to be refused to be able to engage in that type of working. So I would actually hope, probably not what you're expecting me to say, but I would actually hope that this would allow men actually to be able to say, okay, I've had a go at working from home. It's something that I can see that I can manage. It's something that might work in the family. And hopefully they'll be requesting more. And I hope very much that employers are going to be looking at those requests favourably, because we've been able to show that it's something that we can make work, and we can make work quite productively. So I think that will change the gender dynamic, that flexible work is not just for particularly mums of young kids, but flexible work can be for everyone, and it can work for everyone. And it's not until men actually step up and try to engage in that type of work that it actually becomes mainstreamed and becomes something that's a lot more acceptable for everyone to do.
So if you've got, this brave new world where hopefully we're going to have people having more flexibility to potentially work from home, what kind of impact does that have on culture? How do you manage to make the parts of the puzzle and a unified workplace when you've got large percentages of people working from home or from the office and they change over? How do you manufacture a holistic culture in those circumstances?
Can be tricky, and I think you're right to go to culture, because I think we need to rethink the basis on which we're working. So a lot of some research that we've done in the past suggests that many managers say that they're not in favour of having employees and whole teams working off-site because they can't feel that they can trust them, and they don't feel that they're able to be able to work together in a way where it's a productive process because they can't see their teams. So I think that we need to actually start to rethink the way that we're thinking this through. So for me, if we're not trusting our teams to work off-site, that signals to me a bigger issue than the flexible working issue. It's an issue around what the dynamics are in the team. It's around how we talk to teams about what performance expectations are, what our performance management framework looks like. So I think we're going to have to start to delve into some of those types of issues. I think it's also going to mean some challenges for what I would probably characterise as managers who are a little bit more old school. So that they're the ones who presenteeism is really important to them. They like to be able to see bums on seats. They like to be able to see people there working away productively. I think there's going to have to be a change in thinking amongst some of our managerial class about thinking about how do we manage people in a productive way to get this to work. So that's the first thing. But I think that, there are some tricks, and it can be challenging trying to have your team, where someone's in on Thursday, someone's in on Wednesday, someone's in on Friday. Some people are on Zoom in the meetings, some people are, in the coffee shop, But I think that's up to teams to try to negotiate what the best way is, given the work they're trying to deliver, to try to work out what the best way to engage. Something that some organisations who've been quite successful try to do is to find one mutual day when they have the meetings, whether that's in person or in some other way, or have a schedule that's predictable for people and that works across the work cycle and works across the jobs that make up a team. So I think we can't just assume, so we've been talking about the Prime Minister's language, for example, has been around snapping back to where we were before. I would actually encourage people to think a little bit differently than that. So I think a term that we're trying to use is, why don't we think about snapping forward to where we were, where there were some key challenges there. People were finding it hard to access flexible working. People found it difficult to manage working from home, working remotely, working in really dispersed teams. Let's try to work out the ways that we can actually, thinking in the future, how we can try to work in a way that's not just about going back to where we were, but trying to build something better.
Yeah, that's terrific. And I think one of the other things I was going to ask you too, in terms of that working forward piece, is that for our industry, probably more so than most others, there's been an awful lot of workers who've been stood down.
Yeah.
And hopefully as the industry resuscitates, those people will come back into the industry. But that in itself must present some very particular issues for managers, integrating people who've been off work because of this and are now coming back into the business. What are the sort of, are there, not to trivialize it at all, but are there the top tips or the sorts of things you've got to have uppermost in your mind when you're integrating those people back into the workforce?
Yeah, it's going to be tricky because there's a lot of very burnt people out there. I think that the key thing that people should be thinking about right now is actually checking in now and not waiting until you know, everyone eventually, you know, turns up ready to work. I think there are a lot of people out there, and a lot of the government and the data around mental health is suggesting that there's a lot of people really, really suffering at the moment. I think we need to be checking in with teams now, making sure that people are going okay, trying to maintain that connection with people even when they're not working the hours they typically would. As they transition back, I think we have to be really aware that there are going to be some very bruised people who are, you know, some people have been suffering financially and emotionally as a result of these changes, and try to work to build up the resilience of people, and try to acknowledge that different people have had different experiences. And I think it'll be a real challenge in your sector because it's just been such a hard hit for you, and across the board in the areas where your members, you know, have such previously thriving businesses, you know, long-term employees. So I think, you know, I think starting now rather than starting on the day when we start to open the doors. I know some people are doing that really, really well. Yeah. Apart from that, I think that issue is actually just as important as the physical stuff and the keeping people safe, free from the virus.
Absolutely. Look, Ray, thank you so much for your words of wisdom. Sage as ever, thank you. And before I go, I have to ask you one question, because after all, this is, you know, the tourism and transport industries. Once you can travel again, where are you going?
I am going down the South Coast, Margy. That's my special place. So I'll be going down the South Coast, I'll be swimming and I'll be fishing.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Professor Ray Cooper.
Thank you, Margy.